Yeah, so the sermon this morning is based on the entire book of Lamentations, but I just have some selected passages that I'll read. And if you want to follow along in the Pew Bible, you may. It'll be the same translation I'm reading from New International. And thanks for inviting me to preach and for welcoming me. Uh, I did, however, in one of the emails, Jenny said she wasn't going to be here, so I'm still trying to figure out what does that mean that I'm here and she's gone, but I don't think I should take it personally. Lamentations, verse 1, chapter 1. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who is queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are upon her cheeks. Among all her lovers there are none to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads of Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed feasts. All her gateways are desolate. Her priests groan, her maidens grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. And verses 11 and 12. All her people groan as they search for bread. They barter their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. Look, Lord, and consider, for I am despised. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the day of his fierce anger? And chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, how the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendor of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the days of his anger. Without pity, the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath has torn down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonor. Then 18 to 20. The hearts of the people cry out to the Lord. O wall of the daughter of Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint from hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and consider. Whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? Then chapter 3, verse 21 to 32. And I'll just read part of this. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. So most of this past work week, as a carpenter, I was installing doors and door handles and keypad deadbolts. I carefully read and followed the instructions and looked carefully at the diagram and the stuff that I had, and did my best to do exactly like the instructions said. I worked with hope that if I carefully followed the diagrams and instructions, all would be well. The doors would fit and open and close. The keypad with the correct numbers punched in the correct order would open and close the deadbolt. And it worked the way I hoped. Almost. For the sliding door, I assembled the frame, laid it on the floor, followed the diagram, stood it up, moved it into the opening, and what? It's too long. So I did what any self-respecting subcontractor would do. I asked the contractor, what's going on here? I didn't frame this. Well, he did some measuring of the door, did some measuring of the frame, and realized that he had framed it too small, which was kind of a relief for me that it wasn't me that had done the framing. But however, even though it was his mistake, he gave me the privilege of changing the framing. He's such a nice guy. Well, after I changed the opening size, I stood up the frame again, and sure enough, it worked. It fit right in there, fastened it, and all was well. Almost. The contractor was there and helped me hang the door because interior commercial doors are a little on the heavy side and had glass in it. So we carefully started to slide it into the pocket, and it went part way, and then what? It doesn't go anymore unless we spread apart the frame. That'll never work. What is going on here? Well, it hit the trim pieces for the glass that held the glass in place. So I brought the trim pieces to assure you that I'm not making this up. So here's the two trim pieces. And so the door goes in between. If I take it over here quick, you get an idea. So this, of course, goes in the middle of a door like this with the glass. So from the side, you get a better picture. If I put this here, that means this door is a little bit wider by this half an inch. And that's what was rubbing. So it's like, what are we going to do now? Well, in such situations like that, my son, who also does construction, he suggests that you say, if you're a subcontractor, this is, that you say to the contractor, not my job, not my problem. Sometimes I say that sort of in a joking way, hoping that we can all laugh a little bit together, but I try not to overuse that. Now, what do we do when sort of confronted with these, oops, that'll never work sort of things that seem to happen in life? Well, one thing is to get angry. And sometimes you get angry, and then there's a few choice expletives like horse manure or Mylanta, that'll never work. Or a second option is to kind of do some brainstorming and say, okay, what changes do we need to make to deal with this? Oops. Now, a third option is to, what I've alluded to before, say aloud as you sort of walk away, not my job, not my problem, which I try not to overuse that. So when I read the prophets and listen to people, it seems that many deal with life in a similar way that I dealt with the doors and the deadbolts. The mindset is something like this. If I carefully follow the commands of God and follow Jesus and try to be nice to my neighbors, and listen respectfully to another boring sermon, put at least $10 in the offering, and no chewing tobacco, no drinking alcohol, no hanging out with those who do, and clean my toilet at least once a month, whether it needs it or not. If I drive a fuel-efficient vehicle, if I exercise regularly, eat healthy, etc., etc., etc. If I do all that, surely life will work. There will be no pain, no tragedies, no major issues. God will bless and not let anything bad happen to me or my family. And sometimes that happens, or almost. Marilyn was planning to come this morning, and last evening she took a shower and she took a step and then did a sort of a split, apparently, she told me, and sort of buggered up her knee a little bit. And so she sends her greetings and her regrets for not being here. She's trying to nurse herself a little bit. So these things happen. They just seem to happen. And Jeremiah and God's people seem to have a similar mindset. They knew the covenant given to Abraham and Moses that basically says God will give you land, and God will give you many children, and a king in the line of David, and God will treat you as his treasured people. And sometimes all that happened. But then, oops, the Babylonians invaded and demolished God's people. Jeremiah looked at God's people and Jerusalem and saw a deserted, destroyed city that reeked of death. People were trading family treasures for food, desperate to survive. Now what? And we consider our own lives sometimes, or the people around us, and think, I've tried to follow the commands of God, and I've tried to be a good follower of Jesus, and we wonder, why did my family member die in a car accident? Or why was my house demolished by a tornado? Why did my children turn their back on God and on me? Why do people go to war? And why are there so many starving children in the world? And I'm guessing the Christians and other people in Palestine and Ukraine and Sudan and many other countries may look around and wonder, why am I living in the midst of bombings, shootings, destruction, and death? Where is God? And in short, we sometimes wrestle with the tragedies of humanity and question, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, bad things do happen to good people. So now what? Well, some respond to our shared humanity with unending anger and blame. Anger closely followed by choice words, shaking fists at God and family and others, and spewing out blame and venom on God and foreigners and people who vote for the wrong party. And we blame, we criticize, we shame some other for the tragedies of our world. A second option is to totally reject faith in a God of compassion and mercy, believing that only a vengeful, angry, impotent God would allow the hatred and the divisions and the disasters of the world. And so I don't want anything to do with a God like that, they reason. Totally abandon any faith. Others might try to follow the advice of the pop song crooned by Nat King Cole. Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. Or the oldie that states, big girls don't cry, big girls don't cry, yay, etc., etc. And there are similar mantras such as big boys don't cry or real men don't cry. Consequently, when faced with the tragedies of this world, some choose to act as if all is well. And if you smile, everything will be okay. The sun will come shining through for you if you just smile. And what about us as people of faith, faced with the tragedies of life? How do we respond? Well, I suggest we look Jeremiah, other prophets, the Psalms, Jesus, and many people who have chosen lament. After Jeremiah described the destruction, the death, the desolation of Jerusalem, he wrote, "My eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city." And the psalmist writes, "By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." And Jesus looked at the people of Jerusalem and lamented, "You who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I've longed to gather you together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And arriving at the grave of his friend Lazarus, Jesus wept. Jesus was awake all night just before his own death, saying, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Richard Rohr writes, "Life is inherently sad. Humanity is foundationally unfaithful to love and truth." Another wise person quipped, "The bird of life flies over everyone, and we all get splattered." How will we live with life that is inherently sad, with people who are often unfaithful to love and truth? How will we live when we get splattered by the bird of life? Well, one option is unending anger and resentment and bitterness and blaming God or others. There seem to be many angry people who name and blame some other group or other person for all the problems of their life. And the world's problems and the anger and the resentment and the bitterness and the blame seem to grow larger and larger and larger as they repeat over and over and over again the blame to all those people for all the problems. Now, if you read the 5 short chapters of Lamentations this afternoon instead of watching a Phillies ball game, you will find that the prophet vents anger at God, who seems to be angry and punishing. The prophet laments, like an enemy, God has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe, he has slain. He has poured out his wrath like fire. You'll also find that the prophets blame God's people for tragedies because God's people are often unfaithful to God's covenant. The prophet blames, "The Lord has brought Jerusalem grief because of her many sins." Sometimes people or nations do suffer because of sin. Sin is missing the mark, failing to live the wholeness that God intended, missing a life that demonstrates the fruit of God's Spirit, such as love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, gentleness, offering hospitality to people that drop in. The Mennonite Confession of Faith says, through sin, the powers of domination, division, destruction, and death have been unleashed in humanity and in all creation. So when you read Lamentations, you'll find that the prophet describes the domination, the division, the destruction, and death. And we rightly wonder, does God punish nations and people for sin? Many verses in the Bible answer yes. Other verses in the Bible also contend that most often nations and individuals have only themselves to blame for suffering from sin. For example, if we hate our neighbor and dump our trash on their lawn, we can expect that our neighbors will probably stay away from us. We shouldn't be surprised when they're not particularly kind to us. We can expect to reap what we've sown. Consequently, weeping and remorse for our own sin is often the lament that is needed. And Psalm 51 helps us lament and own our sin that hinders our relationship with God and others. And if we struggle to voice our laments, there are about 60 Psalms considered laments that can help us. So regularly reading the Psalms can help us give voice to our grief and our anger, our sadness, our frustration, as well as our joys, and our praise, and our faith and thanksgiving. Another option to the splatters of life is to bottle everything up inside. I strongly discourage that option. Now, sometimes controlling our response is wise. I've heard people blame and complain, no one wants to work anymore. And then they also complain about all the traffic on the road. And I'm tempted to say something like, well, maybe there's so much traffic on the road in the morning and the afternoon because of people who are trying to get to work that don't want to work. But I tend not to say that because it doesn't really help me. It doesn't really help other people. However, stuffing our sadness, stuffing our anger, our questions, it might create ulcers or mental illness or relational brokenness. So I strongly discourage bottling everything up inside. Some people faced with the bad things that happen to good people respond again by abandoning faith in God. Again, I commend to people of faith that when dealing with sadness, that we look to the prophets and Jesus and the Psalms, and we practice lament. Lament can involve weeping, talking, journaling, being alone or with a trusted community of believers. The prophets, psalmists, Jesus, and others model lamenting for the tragedies of the world, for the tragedies of their own community, and for their own tragedies. And I commend lamentation, trusting that lamentation will help us transform a time of hopelessness to hope. As Lamentations 3:21-24 poetically states, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait. The prophet names the effects of the splatters of life. The prophet laments the hopelessness. The prophet remembers God's great love and compassion in the past. The prophet chooses to wait. I trust that we will all experience the transformation from hopelessness to hope through lament. And my prayer for us and for the world is stated in a psalm. May all who go out weeping return with songs of joy. Amen.